The ink was barely dry when my former boss's jaw dropped. His fingers trembled as he held the glossy, signed contract I'd just handed over, not to him, but to the CEO of his biggest competitor. The boardroom, once his domain, now felt like neutral territory. The air was heavy with disbelief, the kind that comes only when arrogance meets its reckoning. Outside the glass walls, his team, the same one that once snickered when he mocked my junior-level contributions, stared in stunned silence. They had no idea the quiet girl from the third floor was the reason their biggest client had walked out 3 weeks earlier. They didn't know I'd been orchestrating every piece of this deal from behind the scenes. He had laughed at me. Laughed when I asked for a modest raise. Laughed when I pointed out a flaw in the proposal he'd rushed. Laughed when I dared to suggest I could do more. Now he wasn't laughing. Because today, I wasn't here as his former employee. I was the lead consultant on a contract he'd spent 2 years chasing, and I was representing the very company he feared the most. His voice cracked as he asked, "Why would they choose you?" I smiled. Not smugly. Just enough to let him know the truth. Because I don't waste time proving my worth to people who can't recognize it. And that was before he read the last line of the contract. The one with his name on the termination clause. My name is Clara Dorsey, and I am 29 years old. For nearly 4 years, I worked under a man named Brent Callahan, a man who believed charm was a substitute for substance, and that praise should only ever go upward. I kept my head down, delivered consistent results, and watched others coast on the fumes of their connections while I did their heavy lifting. I never caused waves. I thought that by proving myself through action, I'd earn my place. But Brent didn't promote skill. He promoted loyalty, the lazy kind that smiled at his jokes and nodded at every mistake. When he gave my promotion to someone who couldn't write a full report without spell check, I finally saw the truth. He thought I was forgettable, disposable. What he didn't know was that while he was busy playing office politics, I was building a quiet kind of power. And soon, I'd use it. From the day I graduated, I knew I wouldn't get anywhere by expecting things to be handed to me. My parents raised me with that understanding, that effort mattered, and people would notice if you did the work, even if you didn't ask for credit. So, when I landed a position as a junior analyst at Hollings & Slate, I treated it like an opportunity, not a stepping stone. The building itself was sleek and modern, all glass walls and polished concrete floors. But beneath that glossy exterior was a culture that rewarded image more than insight. I learned that quickly. There were team meetings where I'd be the only one with numbers prepared. Presentations I wrote that other people took credit for. Nights when I stayed past 11 while others left at 5 with plans and praise. Still, I didn't complain. I believed that if I kept showing up and doing excellent work, it would pay off. I told myself it didn't matter if Brent forgot to include me in his speeches, or if Kyle, my coworker who spent half the day scrolling on his phone, got invited to closed-door meetings I wasn't told about. Kyle was the kind of guy who floated. He never rushed, never worried. He'd saunter into work 15 minutes late, coffee in hand, mumble something about traffic, and then spend most of the morning making conversation or tweaking the formatting on a slide deck I had already completed. He never missed a team lunch, and he was always within earshot of Brent's laugh. It used to frustrate me, the way Brent overlooked my input. If Kyle repeated something I'd said minutes earlier, Brent would light up like it was a revelation. If I sent in a comprehensive report, he'd skim it and pass it off as a joint effort. And if I tried to speak up, I was too direct or not team-oriented. I adjusted. I softened my tone. I shared credit even when it wasn't due. There were moments when I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe Kyle was more capable than he seemed. Maybe Brent had a plan I wasn't part of yet. So I kept pushing forward. I improved our project forecasting model, reduced redundancy in our client workflows, and helped land a major account by quietly coaching the client-facing team from behind the scenes. But the credit never came. One Friday, after a particularly brutal week of picking up Kyle's slack and watching him fumble a pitch I'd prepped, Brent pulled him aside in the hallway and clapped him on the shoulder. "You've got great instincts," he said. "We should talk about where you're headed." I heard it. I was standing just feet away, and I knew in that moment it wasn't a misunderstanding. Brent had made his choice. Still, I waited. I wanted to believe there was a path forward if I just stayed the course. Maybe Brent just needed one big moment to see my value. Maybe the next promotion cycle would be different. I was wrong. And when the promotion came, and it wasn't mine, everything changed. The announcement arrived via company-wide email, buried between calendar invites and digital HR memos. Join us in congratulating Kyle Merritt on his promotion to Associate Director of Strategy. My hands went cold. I read the line twice, then a third time, just to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. But it was there, bold as ever, accompanied by a smug photo of Kyle in a blazer he only wore for presentations, the same ones I used to prepare for him. The email detailed his exceptional leadership, innovative thinking, and client impact. I stared at those words, my mouth dry. Innovative thinking? The only innovation Kyle had ever shown was figuring out how to delegate all his work without anyone noticing. As for leadership, he couldn't lead a team of rubber ducks across a bathtub, let alone manage high-stakes client relationships. I closed my laptop and sat in silence. It wasn't just disappointment. It was betrayal. The long nights, the careful diplomacy, the endless patience, all of it had led to this? A hollow nod from HR and a title handed to someone who'd done less than half the work? Later that afternoon, Brent called a quick meeting. "We're thrilled about Kyle's transition," he beamed, as though he were the architect of some masterstroke. "We think he's really going to drive strategic growth, and I'm counting on all of you to support him." He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "This doesn't change the fact that everyone here is valuable. Promotions happen when the time is right." I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded like a good soldier. Kyle didn't say much. He stood beside Brent with his usual relaxed grin, nodding and shrugging like he wasn't quite sure how this had happened either, which, in fairness, he probably wasn't. I walked back to my desk in a fog. People passed by offering weak smiles or small pats on the shoulder, as if I'd lost a pet or gotten dumped. "Next time," they said. "You've got this. Just hang in there." But I wasn't hanging in anymore. I had hit my ceiling, not because I lacked talent or drive, but because I had been too useful where I was. Brent needed someone to do the work behind the scenes while he played favorites. Kyle was a puppet, easy to promote, easier to control. I was a threat. That night, I didn't go home right away. I stayed in the office long after everyone else had cleared out, watching the city flicker through the windows like a mocking constellation. I opened my personal laptop, plugged in my hard drive, and pulled up the folder I had quietly compiled over the past 6 months. Emails, datasets, version histories, financial reports. It wasn't illegal or malicious. I hadn't planned it out of spite. It had started as insurance, a way to track my contributions when it became clear Brent had no intention of acknowledging them. But now, looking at the sheer weight of the evidence, I saw something more than a record of my work. I saw leverage. Because in the middle of all those spreadsheets and timelines, I also had access to something Brent had forgotten I built, the draft deck for our next big client bid. A multi-million-dollar proposal for an international firm that could double our revenue. I had authored the strategy, organized the research, written the pitch slides, and prepared the demo. Every insight, every recommendation, it had my fingerprints all over it. Kyle's name? Nowhere. And Brent was planning to let Kyle present it at the Investor Summit next month. A plan began to form in my mind, quiet, precise, and devastating. They thought I was invisible, that I'd keep my head down and carry on. But if Brent wanted to make decisions based on loyalty instead of merit, I would let him. And when he reached the last sentence of that pitch deck, the one I had rewritten and buried deep in the speaker notes, he would realize just how grave a mistake he had made. I didn't quit. That was the first thing everyone expected me to do. I showed up every morning with the same steady pace, the same tight smile, and the same color-coded folders tucked under my arm. If anyone noticed how quiet I had become, how detached my eyes looked in meetings, they didn't mention it. Kyle, now basking in his promotion, barely acknowledged me. He tried once or twice to offer half-hearted leadership gestures, "Let me know if you need anything," he'd say while adjusting his tie or sipping his custom coffee order. I'd nod and return to my screen. But behind that screen, I was laying groundwork. The client summit was 3 weeks away. Brent had already told the team that Kyle would be delivering the keynote pitch for our upcoming contract with Marlowe and Pierce, a logistics firm with international reach and deep pockets. It was a critical account, the kind that, if landed, would set our firm apart in our sector. I knew the material better than anyone. I had spent 6 months immersed in Marlowe's existing systems, their inefficiencies, and their aspirations. My analysis had shaped every recommendation we were making. But Brent didn't even ask me to prep Kyle. Instead, he assigned a junior associate to help coordinate slides and told Kyle to make it sound visionary. Watching Kyle stumble through his first prep session was like watching someone try to recite poetry in a language they didn't speak. He tripped over acronyms, mispronounced the client's CEO's name, and confused inventory flowcharts with shipment maps. The worst part was he didn't care. He was used to getting by on charm and Brent's protection. And it had always worked. Until now. I updated the presentation quietly, pretending to support the team effort while subtly restructuring the deck. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to give Kyle the illusion of progress. At the same time, I reached out to someone I had met at a logistics conference months ago, a senior executive at a rival firm called Redding & Company. We had bonded over a shared frustration with how often competent women were overlooked. She remembered me. When I asked if she would be open to a meeting over coffee, she agreed without hesitation. I showed her my analysis, not the company's version, but mine. My raw data, my cleaned models, my refined recommendations. She read through it with sharp interest. "You built this?" she asked. "Every line." She leaned back, eyes narrowed with thought. "And they're giving the credit to someone else?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. A week later, I signed a short-term consulting agreement with Redding & Company under a confidentiality clause. They wanted my insight on a similar restructuring project, the kind that mirrored what I had designed for Marlowe and Pierce. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was the first turn of the knife. By the time the summit arrived, I had already prepared everything Kyle needed to look halfway competent. The client deck was sleek and attractive. The core analysis was still sound, because I had done it. But I had stripped away the connective logic, the quiet bridges between insights that let a true strategist explain not just the what, but the why and how. I handed it over like a polished shell. And then I watched. Kyle strutted into the Marlowe and Pierce presentation like he was hosting a game show. His suit was crisp, his smile wide, and his tone overly confident. The boardroom was filled with quiet, calculating professionals, all of whom had flown in from various corners of the country for this meeting. Kyle's jokes fell flat. His jargon was clumsy. He read the slides like they were cue cards he hadn't seen before, which, in truth, he barely had. He skipped over key data points. He introduced a revolutionary inventory model without understanding the simulation logic behind it. And then, as I knew he would, he opened the floor for questions. That's when it started to unravel. A partner at Marlowe asked about supply redundancy assumptions in the Midwest corridor, a detail buried in the appendix I had quietly removed. Kyle blinked. He gave a vague answer about regional balancing and our layered approach, which meant nothing to anyone in the room. Another asked about reverse logistics, a critical concern for the client. Kyle stared at the slide, hesitated, and then said, "I believe we covered that earlier," even though he hadn't. Silence. And then came the last question, asked by Marlowe's CFO, a sharp, soft-spoken woman who didn't say much during the presentation. She looked directly at Kyle and said, Could you explain the risk mitigation model you applied to our overseas suppliers, particularly in Tier 2 sourcing? Kyle looked at her, then at the screen, then at the empty glass in front of him. He smiled. That's actually something I had my colleague, but he stopped. Because if he admitted I had done the work, he'd undermine himself. But if he tried to fake it, he'd drown. He chose to fake it. And it was painful to watch. After the meeting, Brent was quiet. He didn't say a word to Kyle in the hallway. Didn't clap him on the back. Didn't even offer a good job. I walked a few paces behind them, silent, composed. Back at the office, Kyle avoided eye contact. I heard from a coworker that Marlowe and Pierce had scheduled a follow-up with another firm. The contract was slipping, maybe not entirely gone, but definitely not locked in. And I was invited to Redding and Company's New York office for a private strategy session. They wanted to offer me a full-time role. Better title, better pay, full control of a department. But I said not yet. I wasn't finished here. Kyle's humiliation during the Marlowe and Pierce meeting should have been enough to humble him. But it wasn't. In the weeks that followed, he doubled down, not on effort or improvement, but on control. He knew he was faltering, and instead of learning, he tried to bury every trace of my contribution, hoping to reclaim some sense of dominance. He stopped inviting me to leadership meetings I had previously run. He removed my name from internal reports. On several occasions, he took ideas I had floated in drafts and rewrote them slightly, presenting them as his own in all staff memos. It wasn't just erasure, it was theft. What he didn't know was that I had already begun documenting everything. I kept copies of every draft, every time-stamped message. I had a quiet folder filling with screen recordings, emails, voice notes he left me late at night when he was too tired to think clearly and too careless to cover his tracks. I had built a mosaic, not of his incompetence, which was obvious to many by now, but of his calculated sabotage. One day, Brent stopped by my desk. "Can I steal you for a second?" he asked, his voice low but pleasant. We sat in a glass conference room, the door closed but not locked. He didn't beat around the bush. "Carmen," he said my name for the first time in weeks, "what happened in the Marlowe meeting?" I looked at him carefully. He wasn't accusatory. He wasn't testing me. He was genuinely asking. So I told him the truth. But I didn't frame it as complaint. I walked him through the timeline. The promotions. The reassignment of credit. The files that had been altered. The decisions Kyle had made without understanding their implications. I showed Brent one email, just one, in which Kyle admitted he didn't read the Marlowe proposal in full, and another where he explicitly told me, "Just make it sound smart, I'll wing the rest." Brent leaned back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Then he said something that I hadn't expected. "I always knew he wasn't the brains," he murmured. "But I thought he had the sense to rely on yours." He didn't ask for more evidence. He didn't need to. 2 days later, I was called into his office. On his desk sat a thick envelope. "Your name wasn't in the running before," Brent said evenly. "But after reviewing everything, including what I saw at the summit, it's clear we've underestimated the wrong person." He slid the envelope toward me. Inside was a promotion offer 1 level above Kyle's title. "Take the weekend to think about it," Brent added. "But if you say yes, be ready to take over his team by next month." I nodded slowly, but my mind was already made up. Kyle had clawed his way to the top on charm, shortcuts, and other people's work. But eventually, charm wears thin, and shortcuts lead to cliffs. He had reached the summit, only to find that the ground beneath him was cracking. And the final break was coming. I did not respond to Brent's offer immediately. I did something far more deliberate. That weekend, I organized every file, message, and note I had collected over the last year, the paper trail of Kyle's shortcuts, lies, and inflated credit. I organized them not with malice, but with clarity. My aim wasn't to destroy Kyle. It was to reveal him. Monday morning, I walked into the office wearing a calm expression and a navy blue suit that meant business. I printed my acceptance letter and delivered it directly to Brent's assistant. Word spread quickly. Kyle didn't speak to me that day. He didn't need to. The tension in his jaw, the forced smile, the nervous glance toward Brent's door said enough. He knew something had shifted, but he didn't know how fast his world was about to collapse. That Thursday, Brent called a department-wide meeting. The entire executive floor gathered in the same conference room where Kyle once smirked through a presentation he barely understood. This time, I stood at the head of the table. Brent introduced me as the new senior strategy director. There were a few audible gasps. One of the junior associates actually clapped before catching herself. Kyle shifted in his chair, pale and stiff. But that was only the beginning. Brent continued, "Before we move forward with this next quarter's rollout, Carmen has prepared a short presentation to walk us through some recent developments." I stepped up and clicked the first slide. It was subtle. A timeline. The initial project layout, proposed by me. Then a list of decision changes, all tracked by version control. Each slide layered more data, shifts in deadlines, losses in client confidence, missed ROI targets. All tied to internal communications with Kyle's initials all over them. No accusations. Just facts. Clear, chronological, irrefutable. I ended the slideshow with a chart. Projected revenue if the original plan had been followed versus the actual results after Kyle's revisions. There was silence. Then Brent stood. He looked directly at Kyle. "We'll be conducting a full internal review. Effective immediately, your responsibilities will be temporarily reassigned." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Kyle stood there frozen, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. His lips parted like he might protest, but nothing came out. He knew better. Everything was documented. Everything had his fingerprints. He walked out of the room like a man being pulled by invisible chains. The room remained silent until the door closed behind him. That afternoon, Human Resources launched a full review. By the end of the week, Kyle had been officially demoted. His team was placed under my direction. His office, the one I had once cleaned out to make space for his ego, was reassigned to me. And the best part? He had to sit 2 floors below me. Same building. Same company. But now he worked under the very policies he once scoffed at, answering to the woman he believed was too serious to ever lead. I never gloated. I never spoke ill of him in the halls. I didn't need to. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks in silently, signs a contract, and turns the elevator key to the executive floor alone. He had climbed the ladder on borrowed steps, but I was the one who had built them. And now I held the blueprint, the keys, and the view from the top. It has been 6 months since that day in the conference room. The office feels different now, not because of who leads, but because of how. We've restructured the team, brought back a few talented people who had quietly left under Kyle's mismanagement, and started rebuilding trust with clients. The atmosphere is lighter, more collaborative. People speak up now, offer ideas freely, and know their work will be credited fairly. As for Kyle, he still shows up. He nods stiffly in meetings, keeps his head down, and answers to his new manager, someone he once dismissed in passing. His charm no longer masks his shortcomings. He's just another employee now, one whose title was quietly changed in the company directory, one who no longer holds sway over the direction of anything meaningful. And me? I don't celebrate his fall. I celebrate my climb. Not because I fought dirty, I didn't. I simply waited, endured, and when the time was right, revealed what was already true. I believed in the quiet power of work done well, of facts over noise, of presence over performance. Kyle thought shortcuts and performance could carry him forever. He was wrong. The truth is, being overlooked hurts. Being passed over for someone who didn't earn it? That cuts deep. But I've learned that real power doesn't come from chasing titles. It comes from knowing your worth and never letting someone else define it for you. So I ask you this. If someone tries to climb over you with empty promises and borrowed credit, will you fight them at their game, Or will you quietly build something stronger and let the truth do the talking when it matters most?